Hey everyone, welcome back to another video for ICM 2.0 Python version. In this video, we are going to be talking more about variables and specifically how we can make custom variables to help with our code. This code is starter code from the original lesson. I will go ahead and leave that link in the video description. I've already duplicated it. I've already renamed it and saved it into my account. But you should definitely go get the original if you want to follow along. And just as a reminder, if you are following along, try and set up your screen so that it is half this video and half your code, and always feel free to pause and rewatch whenever you need to. So once you have your code and you run it, you're going to see that it's creating a bunch of ellipses on the screen. And I'm just going to go ahead and space that out a little bit. But I have 5 of them set up. They are all in one row, which means that their Y value is all the same. Their X value is changing as they are moving further and further apart across the screen. Now, this is great, but similar to the last lesson where we talked about centering things and using width and height in case we ever change the size of our canvas, what if here I decided I love this row, it's going to be a part of my final design, but I don't want it there. Maybe I want it shifted to the left or to the right. Maybe I want it up or down. All of those things could happen. And as it stands right now, because these ellipses are hard coded, I would need to go through and change every single ellipse, which isn't the end of the world, but it is enough to be frustrating and maybe a little redundant, a little repetitive, not as efficient as it could perhaps be. And whenever I see things in my program that are redundant, repetitive, less efficient, I should be looking for a better way to do it, because one thing about programmers is we're lazy people. We do a lot of hard work. And so when we do not have to repeat that hard work, we want to take advantage of it. So right away, something I noticed is that all of the Y values of my ellipses are all 60. And that's true for the size too. We're just going to focus on position for now. So I want to create a variable that will just hold on to that 60. So I can use the same variable everywhere. And then I can just change that variable instead of changing the individual values. So Python variables make it pretty easy to start out. We just need a word that the computer is unfamiliar with. So in this example, because I'm talking about the Y position of my circle, I'm going to call this variable circ_y. Now, a few little variable conventions for you. They usually start lowercase. We'll talk about uppercase words in later lessons once we get into objects in Unit 4. And in Python, a typical convention is snake casing, which uses an underscore to separate like words or components of the words like circ and y. When we have a word and then the next one is capitalized, that's something called camel casing. Camel casing is really common in JavaScript and also Java. Because processing the library was built off of a Java library, processing is originally Java, you're going to see that functions and other things are camel cased. And so for the purpose of these lessons, I'm going to keep the variables camel cased as well. If you are a Python familiar and snake casing feels better to you, if you choose to teach snake casing or you just want to try it out, please feel free. Just keep in mind variables start with a letter. They include no spaces, they can have numbers at the end, and they just cannot be a repeated word that the computer has already been taught is something else. So for example, calling this variable ellipse would be silly. Calling it width wouldn't work out well since width is already a system variable that is already doing something. So once we have our variable, we've given it a name. That's our declaration. We have decided we are declaring that this is a word we will be using. We need to give it a value, and we do that with a single equal sign. So circ_y equals, and I'm just going to set it equal to 60. Because I have made this variable at the very top of my screen outside of setup and outside of draw, this is what we refer to as a global variable, meaning I can use it in every location. When I declare variables in more specific places, it becomes a script or like a local variable, meaning I could only use it in setup or draw. We're going to talk more about that later as we get into more specific things with functions. And we're also going to see ways in this lesson that we can utilize global variables, even if we need to give them value in something like setup. to utilize some of those parts of the processing module. So I have my variable, it's called circ_y equals 60. If I run my program, nothing has changed because I haven't actually used this variable yet. I've declared it, I've initialized it, and step 3 is to put it to work. So I'm going to go through each ellipse, and everywhere I see that y value 60, I'm going to replace it with circ_y. So I have all my circ_y's in. Now if I hit play, it should still look like nothing has really changed, but that's actually great because I haven't changed this variable yet. This just means my variable is functioning as the number 60. It's working exactly the same as if I had that number hard-coded. Now let's figure out what happens if I change this variable. What if this variable is 90 instead of 60? If I hit stop and then run, we can see that every single circle has moved down my page. If I hit stop and run this as, let's say, 150, they've moved even further down my page, which means my variable is working. And instead of having to update every ellipse individually, I can update them all at once. Now, what if I also want to be able to change the X value? I want to shift them left and right. I can do that as well. And it's going to look very similar to when we use mouse X and mouse Y to move a whole shape with the mouse. I'm going to create a variable. Oops, I'm going to make sure I'm typing. I'm going to create a variable now called circ_x, and I'm going to give circ_x a starting value of 120 because that is the X value for my very first ellipse. So for this ellipse, I can just fill in circ_x as it is. For my next ellipse, I don't want to put in just circ_x because that would fill in the number 120. I want to go back to thinking about the distance between 120 and 200, and that distance is a positive 80. So here I would put circ_x plus 80. For the next one, I'm thinking of the distance between, I believe that said 280. I'm thinking about the distance between 120 and 280, and that's 160. So circ_x plus 160. Now I'm thinking about the distance between 120 and 360. So circ_x plus 240. And here I'm thinking about the distance between 440 and 120. So circ_x plus 320. Now again, when I hit play, the first thing I'm looking for is no shift left or right, and I'll make sure my canvas is back to the starting position so we don't get tricked visually. Nothing has changed, circ_x is working, but now if I were to change the circ_x to, let's say, 20, they should all shift. So now they're all much closer to this side of the screen. If I were to change circ_x to 50, they're going to go a little bit further to the right. If I were to change it to 300, they should all be much farther to the right. I have to do like a scroll and they're going off page. And I can always turn it back to 120 to get them to where they originally were. This is my most basic version of using a variable. Now, there's lots of ways I can use variables, and there's lots of ways I can hold value in my variables. One thing that we may want to do as time goes on is hold color in my variables. And lucky for us, there is actually a processing data type called color where I can feed in 3 numbers to hold an entire color. But let's see what happens if we try and do that here. I'm going to make a variable called circ_color. And I'm going to give it the color magenta, which I just happen to know off the top of my head. So you're going to see magenta all the time. I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to hit run. No errors so far. So let's try and use circ_color. I'm going to put a fill above my ellipse. I'm assuming they're all going to be the same color for now. I'm going to type in circ_color. I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to hit play. Oh, and they worked fine. I guess color works fine outside of this. Every now and again, you might get weird errors with trying to use something like color outside of the processing functions. And I want to say that this is something that I've actually encountered before, and it's really messed up. If that is the case for you, if something should mess up here, or if you just want to change something later, you can change things later by declaring that you're using a global variable. So maybe I have circ_color as magenta, and for some reason I decide I want to change it to yellow, but I don't want to change it until I am inside setup. This is kind of a nonsensical example. It's not something I would normally do, but I do want to show you. If I were to just write circ_color equals color 255, 255.0, and I run it, you'll notice that my color is still magenta. And that is because right now, this circ_color in setup is different from this global circ_color. This thinks that I am making a cert color variable that is specific to the setup function. It is local and not global. And so it is not reading it the same way as it does inside the draw function. If I wanted to fix this, if I wanted to make sure it turned yellow, I could write global cert color above the place where I use my variable, hit stop, hit run, and now you'll see that it has taken on that yellow color that I decided it should have inside setup. I'm not getting the error right now, but this also goes for if you ever create something and you are getting error messages that this variable doesn't have a value, even though you know you gave it a value, or this variable could not be read, or it's a number you don't expect. You may just need to let the computer know that you are using a global version of that variable. And you can declare the variable to be global in setup if you are giving it a value in setup, or in draw if you are giving it a value in draw, or if draw is the place where it is trying to tell you, hey, I don't know what that value is. So please keep this in your back pocket. You'll see it throughout our code. The situations where it pops up might be a little unfamiliar at first because variable scoping, which is what we call the parts of the program that can or cannot see the variable, can be weird and a little unintuitive. So please just use this to explore and troubleshoot if you do run into any of those problems. Thank you so much, and we will explore more of using these variables in our future programs. Thanks, guys.